Before the sun bled over the cliffs of the Caucasus, there was already a cry buried in the stone. It was not human, though it had been born of flesh. It was not divine, though it made the heavens tremble. It was the sound of Prometheus enduring yet another dawn, while the chains driven into his wrists drank his strength and proclaimed to the icy wind that Zeus still ruled through fear. Every morning, the mountain became a tribunal. No judge spoke. No sentence needed to be repeated. The punishment already knew the way. First came the silence, thick as ancient mourning. Then the beat in the wings. At last, the hunger. Zeus's eagle descended, tearing through the clouds like a living blade, with a beak made to profane immortal flesh. It landed without haste. Its eyes showed no mercy. They were accustomed. Prometheus, the titan who had stolen fire for mankind, no longer counted the days. He counted only the wounds. Each peck tore away more than just liver. It tore away memory, pride, hope. And even so, he did not beg. Olympus demanded mise. Prometheus offered clenched teeth. Up there, among columns of gold and wine served by obedient hands, the gods called it justice. Zeus called it order. Hera called it an example. Ares called it deserved weakness. Only the thunder sometimes hesitated, as if even the sky knew there was something monstrous in that eternity of pain. But on an afternoon when the horizon seemed charred and the wind carried the scent of bronze, blood and storm, something changed on the mountain path. It was not an eagle, nor a god, nor an executioner. It was a man who walked as if the very earth feared him. His body bore scars that looked like ancient prophecies. Draped over his shoulders, the skin of the Nemean lion hung like a conquered knight. In his hands he carried no compassion. He carried strength. And behind his eyes there burnt no mercy. There burned resolve. Hercules had faced monsters, kings, labyrinths of guilt and rivers of blood. But that mountain was different. There, no beast of the earth was alreading. There, cruelty stood dressed as law. There, the enemy had neither claws nor fangs, but a throne. When he saw Prometheus chained to the rock, his chest torn open by divine brutality, Hercules understood that there were pains worse than death. There were calculated pains. There were sufferings designed to last. And there was a wrath atop Olympus that preferred torment to an end. Then the wind changed direction. The eagle returned to the skies, the chains creaked, and for a terrible moment the entire mountain seemed to hold its breath, as if the world knew that from then on someone would step across a line forbidden by the gods. Because in that twilight, amidst the Titan's blood, the hero's shadow, and the invisible gaze of Zeus, a story would begin that was not just about rescue. It spoke of challenge. It spoke of vengeance. It spoke of the moment when Hercules lifted his eyes to the sky, and the sky realized that, for the first time in a long while, someone had come willing to answer Zeus's wrath with his own hands. There are ancient myths born to be admired, others to be feared, but this story belongs to a far darker and more sinister lineage. It was specifically crafted to be heard with a heavy heart, as if each word carried the hollow echoes of heavy chains dragged across cold, damp stone. Because when Hercules found Prometheus, he did not find merely a punished titan. He found the exposed wound of divine power. Prometheus had given men fire, but fire was never just a flame. It was thought, defense, forge, rebellion. By stealing it from Olympus, he did not give humanity merely warmth. He gave them possibility. And Zeus, who tolerated worship but never autonomy, decided to turn the Titan's punishment into an eternal spectacle. Thus, at the ends of the earth, where the cold cuts like a blade and loneliness rots the bones, Prometheus was left imprisoned, not for days, not for months, but for a time that lost all connection to calendars. His pain became part of the landscape. His blood mingled with the stones. His name became a whisper among frightened mortals. Then Hercules appears, son of Zeus, and yet still hounded by the very whims of divine blood. A hero shaped not only by victories, but by humiliation, fury, and penance. He does not walk towards that mountain in search of easy glory. He walks because he recognizes in Prometheus' suffering the brutal signature of a power that has already devastated his own life. In this narrative, the eagle is not just a winged beast, it is the mouth of the sentence. The chains are not just metal, they are Zeus's will turned into a prison. And the sky, which ought to bless, hangs overhead as a silent witness to a ritual violence. You will hear about torn flesh, thunder held back, decisions that wound the order of Olympus, and an encounter that seems small in the face of the god's vastness, but which echoes as blasphemy through eternity. Because sometimes an act of courage does not topple an empire, it merely forces it to show its true face. And that face here is Zeus's, sovereign, fearsome, magnificent and cruel. A god who confuses obedience with balance and terror with justice. A father of the heavens who, in punishing Prometheus, believed he was teaching the world a lesson. He did not realize he was setting the stage for a challenge. So, make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and surrender yourself to this dark journey to the rock where pain never sleeps. Stories like this are not meant to be heard in haste. They need to be crossed as one crosses a stormy night, feeling each flash of lightning carve scars into the darkness. And when you finish, let me know in the comments which city and state you're watching from. I want to know from which part of the world you're hearing this ancient call, while the winds of the Caucasus blow once more and Zeus's eagle circles above. Now, come closer. The fire Prometheus stole still crackles in the depths of human memory, and tonight, by the light of that forbidden fire, we will open the doors to a story where compassion tastes of blood, freedom comes at the price of sacrilege, and even the gods, for a brief moment, feel the weight of what they have created. The Caucasus was not a mountain, it was a sentence raised up to the sky. Its slopes looked like the ribs of a dead colossus, and the wind that blew through the cracks carried a harsh lament, as if the very stone had learned to suffer. In that desert of height and ice, Prometheus remained imprisoned, stretched out against the rock like a living offering to Olympian cruelty. Hephaestus had forged the chains with bitter skill. They were not mere shackles. Each link had been shaped to withstand the strength of a titan and to humiliate what it could not destroy. On Prometheus's wrists, the metal carved deep grooves. Around his ankles, the prison throbbed to the rhythm of his regeneration, wounding again what could never fully heal. The cold burned but did not kill. Hunger gnawed at him but did not consume. Exhaustion bent him but never brought complete oblivion. Zeus did not want a corpse, he wanted presence. He wanted Prometheus to be awake enough to understand every moment of his punishment and alive enough to begin the torment anew with each dawn. When the first light of day touched the cliff, the air changed. The sky became a taut dome, and the clouds parted with the discipline of soldiers. That was when the eagle appeared. Huge, dark, majestic in its wickedness, it descended in a precise arc, as if obeying not instinct, but a decree. Prometheus saw it coming and kept his eyes open, not out of empty bravado, but out of contempt. If Zeus wanted a spectacle, he would have it without supplication. The beak pierced his flesh with methodical violence, tearing open his abdomen, searching for the organ destined for the repetition of horror. The blood ran hot over the frozen stone, and the scream that escaped him made the wind recoil. Even so, there was something the eagle could never devour: conviction. Prometheus remembered the moment he stole the fire. He remembered the hidden flame, the light burning in human hands, the astonishment in the mortals' eyes when they realized the night could be challenged. That memory burned stronger than the pain. On rare nights, when the day's torment withdrew and regeneration restored flesh to his mutilated body, he gazed at the stars. He saw in them a fierce irony. The sky that punished him also sheltered the ancient order from which he had come. He was no longer a child of that luminous vastness. He had become its most famous prisoner. Mortals spoke his name in hushed tones. Some called him a benefactor, others a foe. Some saw him as the secret father of progress, others as proof that defying the gods cost more than any being could pay. Prometheus knew all this, as one hears rumours carried by the wind. Nothing changed the rock, nothing drove the bird away. In that endless cycle of torment, a suspicion began to grow within him. Olympus did not keep him imprisoned merely to punish him. He was kept on display to remind the world that compassion can be treated as a crime when it threatens power. His body was a warning carved into the mountain, and yet, even reduced to wound and bone, Prometheus remained dangerous. Because a prisoner who suffers may inspire pity, but a prisoner who suffers without renouncing his own deed inspires something far more threatening: courage. It was this spark, tiny, almost invisible, that began to rise from the rock to the sky like a wisp of smoke, announcing that the story was not yet over. Hercules came from afar, and it was not only the dust of the roads that covered his skin. There was upon him a deeper weariness, made of imposed sins, impossible tasks, and victories that never quite washed away the weight of the past. His steps had their solidity of someone who had already crushed monsters, but his eyes bore the shadow of one who had learned that strength does not always overcome one's own guilt. Son of Zeus, he knew both the brilliance of divine blood and the bitterness of its curse. Hera had pursued him like someone who nurtures a patient hatred. Madness, loss, remorse, the humiliating labours under Eurystheus' orders, all of this had carved into him a brutal understanding. The gods could create heroes only to watch them bleed all the more. When he heard about the Titan chained high in the Caucasus, something stirred within him. It wasn't curiosity nor a thirst for fame, it was recognition. Heracles knew the difference between a trial and sheer cruelty. Killing a monster in combat was one thing. Watching, day after day, as a being was devoured in the name of authority was something else entirely. The climb was low. Loose stones slid beneath his sandals, the wind lashing his face like icy whips. Even so, he pressed on, wrapped in the invulnerable lion's skin, carrying his bow, club, and a resolve not yet fully named. He did not climb as a servant of Olympus. He climbed as someone willing to look upon punishment and decide what to do with his own conscience. It was near the summit that he heard the first sound. Not the cry of the present, but the echo of ancient screams steeped in the landscape. It seemed as if the mountain had memorized Prometheus's pain and now returned it in murmurs buried among the stones. Heracles stopped. The world around became severe, heavy, almost ceremonial. Then he saw the Titan was trapped, as if the very rock had swallowed him up to the chest. There were layers of dried blood, flesh reformed over fresh scars, sunken eyes that still burned with a dignity almost unbearable to witness. He was not merely a condemned man, but a living insult to the complacency of the heavens. Prometheus raised his face with difficulty and observed the man before him. He recognized in him the mark of Zeus, and at the same time, something else: honest weariness. Heracles did not carry the Olympian arrogance. He bore the weight of those who had already been used by higher wills and survived long enough to distrust them. "If you've come to gaze upon me," said Prometheus in a harsh voice, "look closely, for this is how Olympus rewards those who offer something to mortals." Heracles did not reply immediately. His eyes rose to the pierced wrists, the torn chest, the chains fused to the rock. It stirred in him a silent rage, more dangerous than any shout, because in that moment the hero understood that there was an invisible line linking his own story to that of the Titan. Both had been touched by the hand of Zeus, albeit in different ways. One had been begotten, the other punished, but both knew the face of a power that called itself just, while dispensing suffering as a form of teaching. And when the beating of wings began to echo once more over the abyss, Heracles did not retreat. He lifted his eyes to the darkened sky and tightened his grip on his weapon. His whole body became a promise of violence, for Zeus's eagle was returning, and for the first time in ages would find someone waiting. The sky closed like an irritated eyelid. The clouds, once scattered, began to gather over the summit, forming slow and menacing circles. Hercules felt the wind change, becoming sharper, almost oily, as if it carried the ancient scent of feathers, warm blood and torn flesh. Prometheus closed his eyes for a moment. He knew that omen better than any prayer. Then the eagle appeared. It did not descend abruptly like a reckless beast, but with calculated arrogance, tracing a vast arc over the mountain. Its wings were vast enough to cast a shadow over the entire rock. The curved beak gleamed with an obscene wetness, and in its talons there was the certainty of a monstrous habit. Hercules watched the creature with fierce attention. This was not an ordinary animal made enormous by the fantasies of men. There was a disciplined intelligence in it, a reflection of Zeus's own order. The eagle did not hunt to live. It performed a liturgy. Its flight seemed to say, pain can become routine, and routine can be crueler than fury. When it landed before Prometheus, the entire mountain trembled. Smaller stones tumbled into the abyss. The bird inclined its head in a grotesque bow to the Titan's body, like a priest before the altar. Then it spread its wings once more, letting out a metallic cry that pierced the air and echoed among the cliffs like war trumpets. Prometheus clenched his jaw. Hercules stepped forward. The eagle noticed the new presence and stared at him with ancestral disdain. Perhaps it recognized in him the blood of Zeus. Perhaps it simply recognized an obstacle. Even so, it turned back to the Titan's abdomen, determined to perform the ritual as it had done countless times before. It was then that Hercules acted. With a swift movement, he snatched the bow from his back and fired the first arrow before the wind could even interfere. The arrow cut through the distance with a sharp whistle and struck the base of the left wing. The eagle erupted in a wild roar, rising in fury and scattering dark droplets through the air. But the creature did not fall. It spun around and charged. It came at Hercules with celestial violence, its talons spread wide like scythes. The hero raised his arm, clad in the skin of the Nemean lion, blocking the blow that would have torn an ordinary man to the bone. The impact made him slide across the rock, but he did not fall. The bird struck again, pecking, tearing, trying to blind, to rend, to assert itself as an extension of Olympus's wrath. Hercules responded with earthly brutality. He set the bow aside, gripped his club, and brought it down with all the strength of the labours, guilt, and humiliations accumulated in his soul. The sound of the blow echoed like wood against divine bronze. The eagle staggered, but was still alive, still furious. And then Hercules seized it. His hands closed around the feathered neck, while the creature thrashed its wings, tearing through the air, the hero, and the very mist. It was a fight without elegance, without heroic music, without unblemished glory. Just muscle, feather, bone, and despair. With a final roar, Hercules hurled the bird against the rock and dealt it death. The eagle's final cry rose to the sky like an open challenge. For one terrible second, everything fell silent. And that silence was worse than any thunder, because it meant that Zeus had just felt, from high upon his throne, the exact moment when a part of his punishment had been destroyed. The eagle lay twisted upon the rock, its feathers stained with blood, its wings spread in a gesture that resembled a profaned sacrament. Hercules was breathing heavily, with cuts on his arms and face, while Prometheus gazed at the creature's corpse as if facing the end of a curse so ancient it seemed part of nature itself. But both knew the bird was only half the prison. The chains remained fastened to the Titan's wrists, like metal teeth buried down to the very will. They would not come loose out of compassion, nor yield to mere effort. Each link had been forged by divine command, designed not to yield to time, wear, pain, or ordinary strength. To free Prometheus would require more than courage, it would require defiance. Hercules approached the rock and ran his fingers over the links fused into the granite. He felt the supernatural coldness of the metal, a chill that did not belong to the mountain, but to the disdain of Olympus itself. He clenched his jaw and dug his feet into the ground. Then he tried to break the first link using only his hands. The metal groaned but did not give way. The muscles in Hercules' arms tensed like cables pulling an invisible wall. Blood began to flow again from the wounds opened in battle. Prometheus, though exhausted, almost smiled. Not out of mockery, but because he knew that Zeus's will was rarely broken at the first attempt. The sky answered before the hero could try again. A thunderclap burst over the summit with such force and proximity that the white light turned the rock and the bodies into spectres for an instant. Then came the voice of the storm, not in audible words, but as a brutal pressure on the air, as if the very heavens were leaning down to crush him. Hercules lifted his face. He did not see Zeus, but he felt his presence. Not a presence of flesh or image, but of absolute authority, accustomed to never being denied. It was the weight of a cosmic father, of a king whose fury could set seas ablaze and reduce kings to dust. Even so, the hero did not bow his head. He then drew his sword. The blade had no divine gleam. It was a human creation, subject to use, to rust, and to war. Perhaps that was why it was fitting. With it, he began to strike at the points where metal met stone, searching for the slightest flaw, the invisible crack, the gap where Zeus's will might have let some imperfection slip through. With each blow, the thunder answered. With every spark torn from the iron, the sky grew darker. Prometheus felt the vibrations running through his bones. For ages, no one had dared attempt such a thing. For ages, the punishment had been accepted as part of the landscape. And now, a son of Zeus himself was turning centuries of obedience into a scene of rupture. At last, the crack. Small, dry, but undeniable. The first link broke, then another still. The chains groaned like wounded creatures. Hercules kept striking, even as the rain began to pour down heavily, washing blood, feathers, and soot over the cliff. His arms were already trembling, but his rage had found its purpose. With one final blow, the metal finally gave way. Prometheus collapsed forward, free and devastated, falling to his knees on the blood-soaked stone. And at the very moment his chains touched the ground, a thunderclap more terrible than any before tore through the sky. It was not just a storm, it was Zeus responding. The king of Olympus had been challenged. And now the whole vault of heaven began to bend beneath his wrath. The summit of the Caucasus became an altar to the storm. Black clouds swirled in a spiral, compressing the sky until it seemed like a vault on the verge of collapse. Lightning tore through the darkness with a ferocity that was almost sentient, like serpents of fire seeking flesh. Prometheus, newly freed, could barely support his own weight. Heracles remained standing, facing upwards, as if daring the heavens to descend. Then the voice came. It did not descend as a human sound, nor as speech organized into syllables. She went through it all at once. Stone, blood, air, memory. When Zeus manifested his wrath, even silence was violated. The whole world seemed to remember, in a single shudder, who ruled the heights. My son, the word didn't sound tender. It sounded like possession. Hercules felt the phrase strike his chest harder than any physical blow. Zeus did not need to appear. His dominion imposed itself through the weight of the sky, through the ancestral fear ingrained in all creatures, through the universe's habit of obeying before even understanding. But Hercules was no longer made of pure obedience. He had slain monsters. He had survived shame, manipulation, the pain of bearing crimes that drove him mad inside. Faced with that colossal power, he did not feel equal. He did feel smaller, yes, and yet unyielding. Sometimes courage is not born of greatness, but of refusal. Zeus demanded an explanation, demanded reverence, demanded that the hero acknowledge he had broken a sacred order. Prometheus, kneeling, lifted his face and listened in silence. For ages that voice had defined his days of torment. Now, beside him, it found not a trembling servant, but a man breathing like a cornered beast that decides to bite. Hercules replied without raising his voice. He said he had seen too much punishment to call that justice. He said that a punishment which feeds on eternity does not teach, it only festers. He said that Prometheus had suffered because he had given men what the gods wanted to keep for themselves, the spark that turned submissive creatures into beings capable of creation. The storm went mad. A bolt of lightning struck so close that it split the rock with a brutal crack. Fragments flew across the abyss. Zeus needed no further words. The entire sky spoke for him. The threat was clear. Olympus could crush them both, reduce them to ash and echo. The power was still there, immense, practically untouched. And yet, something had changed. Prometheus was free. The eagle was dead. The chains lay broken. Zeus could punish again, but he could not undo the moment when his authority had been defied before the whole world. Even gods notice when a crack appears in their image. After a long silence charged with electricity, the presence began to withdraw. Not because Zeus had forgiven, not because he accepted the affront, but because even tyranny chooses its moments. The king of Olympus left the summit still shrouded in fury, carrying with him a silent promise of memory and possible revenge. The storm gradually subsided. All that remained were rain, mist, and the laboured breathing of two beings marked by the same sovereign. Hercules helped Prometheus to stand up. There was no clear triumph in that gesture, nor any music of victory. There was only exhaustion, risk, and a wounded dignity, yet still intact. On that mountain, the sky had not been brought down, but had been forced for a brief and unforgettable moment to retreat in the face of courage. And so that night in the Caucasus came to an end. Not with celebration, not with crowns, not with the gods descending to acknowledge greatness, but with rain washing the blood from the rock and two survivors breathing beneath a sky still hostile. Prometheus moved on, bearing on his body the scars of an eternity of torment. Hercules descended the mountain carrying something heavier than weapons, the certainty that even the most legendary strength trembles when it chooses to confront cruelty turned into law. This story is not just about a hero freeing a condemned man. It is about the moment when compassion becomes defiance, and defiance forces power to reveal what it truly is. The eagle, the chains, and the wrath of Zeus were not merely elements of an ancient punishment. They were instruments of an order sustained by fear. When Hercules broke them, he did not destroy Olympus, but he shattered its silence. And sometimes an empire begins to weaken, not when it falls, but when someone finally dares to name its cruelty. If this story struck you like lightning in the dark, make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and let me know in the comments which city and region you're watching from. I want to know where you heard this dark legend from, and when the next night falls, we'll open another ancient door, because myths never truly sleep. They simply wait in some corner of the darkness until someone has the courage to listen to them once again.